do. The Icarus Man is not Bernie Madoff, Kenneth Lay of Enron fame, Mel Gibson, or more recently, Charlie Sheen. Okay? These guys are damaged, consciousnessless psychopaths. That is not our Icarus Man, although they engage in some of the behavior that looks like the Icarus Man. The Icarus Man cannot surmount his shameful acts because he suffers from a repetition compulsion that is impossible to control. You look at Tiger Woods. It wasn't sufficient to go to one Waffle House waitress. He did every Waffle House on the PGA Tour. You know, it's just a repetitive kind of thing. As a result, they present a very, very high suicide risk because they cannot reconcile the behavior that they clearly know is wrong from what they believe is right. They suffer from a serious obsessive compulsive disorder and bipolar disorder, and sometimes in combination. And these are things that are not diagnosed for them before they crash and burn, because OCD and the manic component of bipolar disorder often makes you very successful in this OCD and manic bipolar world that we live in. So it goes unrecognized, and in an ironic way, it sometimes is a component of why they're so successful. They suffer from serious addictions to drugs, sex, alcohol, or gambling. And they're extremely moralistic and philanthropic and pillars of their community. Now, the picture of this gentleman here, Mehdi Gabazadeh, you may remember the case because it was American Tissue Company. It was right over here in Hauppauge. Can you hear? I'm getting too far from this.
Could you move the microphone a little to your right so it won't feed back?
Are you getting feedback?
Yeah.
How is this? Is this loud enough for everybody?
No.
No? It's too low?
Just have to move the microphone out of the field.
Yeah, that's it when they, what is that?
Hold it steadily. Hold it.
Hold it?
Hold it by your mouth.
Okay, that's, I'm going to do a juggling act here. All right, let's see. All right, how's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Mehdi Gabazadeh was a Jewish man from Persia, as the Iranians like to be called. He was Persian. He had escaped from the Ayatollah, and he had saved over 100 Iranian Persians and Jews at peril to his own life and fortune when Khomeini took over. He came to America and he bought up foundering paper companies that made toilet paper and paper towels and pad paper, and he turned them around and made them extremely successful. And he was very philanthropic. If somebody came to his door and asked for money to buy a house, to send their children to school, to spend for medical bills, he wrote a check immediately. He was truly that kind of a person. But then something happened. He started working 24/7, he started traveling all over the United States, and he started becoming a corporate raider. He started buying up paper mills throughout the South and New England in towns that were sort of part of the Rust Belt now, with a lot of unemployment, with mills that were no longer functional. And he turned these mills around. The only problem is a lot of it was leveraged, none of it was real, a lot of it was on paper, and by the time the feds caught up with him, it was fraud that came into the level of between $700 million and $900 million. Now that's a picture of Mehdi Gabazadeh when he was a fat cat. By the time he went through his trial and went to prison, he looked about half that size, and he was really very ill. And he continues to be actually in a federal prison in a hospital unit. And the only reason he was not given a life sentence is because in the federal law, If you have done something extraordinary, if in combat you have saved someone's life, if you have been a hero in civilian life, as he was, that will shave time off your sentence. So the tragedy was, here was a man who was responsible for saving hundreds of people's lives, and also responsible for ruining his own life, the life of his family, and the life of many people in those towns that now had no way to work. When I went to visit his home in Great Neck, the feds had come in and repossessed everything that he owned. The family was left with one pot, one glass, one fork, one knife, and a plate. And everything else went up on auction to try to pay the restitution for that debt. The Icarus man is an early achiever, a prodigy who never had a chance to have a childhood. And you see on the right, that's a picture of Tiger Woods when he was 3 years old. He was already a veteran of several appearances on the Johnny Carson show. He already had a trust fund that was over $1 million. He was a family meal ticket. The Icarus man is often the product of a narcissistic father, and you see Tiger there embracing his dad, Earl. Anybody know what a narcissistic person is? They love themselves? Yeah.
They're very involved with themselves, their own needs, and that's
Right.
more important than anybody else.
Okay, that's a good answer. This lady said that a narcissistic person is very involved with their own needs. They really don't care about anyone else. They're the center of everything. And very often that is the Icarus man's story, that they have a father who, in a sense, uses them for the fame, the money, the power that perhaps they never had if the father was not particularly successful. If the father was very successful, like in the case of Elliot Spitzer, his father was a multimillionaire real estate industrialist, the narcissism goes to the extent of being distant and rejecting. They don't care about the son. They don't notice the son. They believe that the son could never achieve what they've had, and the son is decidedly second rate. So the Icarus man has an axe to grind then. They have something to prove to be able to get their father's attention, which of course they know. That's a quotation that I took from John Z. DeLorean. You may remember his story. He was the glamour boy of the 60s and the 70s. You see a picture of him there with his stainless steel masterpiece car, and he was gorgeous. Actually, he looks a lot like George Clooney. If they ever make a movie of his life, they'll probably cast George Clooney in the role. He came from a poor mining family in West Virginia. His parents were Slavic. They didn't even speak English. He put himself through school, actually working in the mines, and he was a brilliant young engineer. He flew too close to the sun. He decided that he was going to take on General Motors. The United States of America doesn't take on General Motors, except recently. Back in the day, you didn't. And he got involved in this ridiculous cocaine bust that was set up by the FBI, and he was finally cleared of those charges. But his life was destroyed. His wife left him. She took his children. And he wound up, in the end, he died about 2 years ago, he wound up penniless. He was living in an apartment that was paid for by Donald Trump, because Donald Trump had met him on several occasions back in the day when he was flying high. And Trump, who was not known to have a soft heart, felt that it was very shameful to have someone who was such a who seemed to be such a brilliant entrepreneur and businessman fail and result in abject poverty. So he bailed him out. And at the end of his life, DeLorean became extremely religious too. It's lonely at the top. The Icarus man nearly always has an unconscious desire to be caught, stopped, and punished. And that's one of the big differences between someone like Bernie Madoff or someone like any of these. I mean, there's another scandal out now of insider trading, $30 million, and these stockbrokers. Psychopaths very often get away with it because they know what they're doing is wrong, they don't care, and they don't want to be caught. Bernie Madoff, if any of you think that the feds were able to take everything he had, if any of you think that you go into his apartment and find one plate, one fork, and one knife, I have a condo in Florida to sell you. You know, they're different. And you look at all of these men, Spitzer and Clinton and Tiger Woods, they leave a trail. Email, text messages, voice messages, love children, hiking in the Appalachian Trail. I mean, these are ridiculous. They're so easy to find these things. Spitzer, putting things through his expense account for call girls. Now, come on. The average Long Island guy who's cheating on his wife, and I'm not saying that the average Long Island guy cheats on his wife, but you know who you are. Anyway. You're not going to leave motel receipts in your dresser or credit card bills or text messages, for goodness sakes. I had a case of a man, and it was all over the news, who was a partner at Deloitte. I mean, a man who was the top of his field as a tax attorney. And he started emailing a former mistress from the family computer, even when they were in Disney World. And the teenage kids go on and they're like, what's this? Now, is that man asking to be caught and punished? Is he asking to be stopped because he's in a spiral of self-destruction, a carousel that he can't jump off? A sad and a kind of counterintuitive thing about the Icarus man is that he's what I call father interrupted. And you see the pictures there, and they're very poignant pictures. You see Governor Sanford and his children, and that picture in the center of Clinton and his daughter Chelsea. You see Tiger and his little girl. You see the picture in the corner there about DeLorean and his two children. And the boy is actually not even his child. The boy was an illegitimate child of someone who worked for General Motors. And the girl had come to him because her parents, she found herself pregnant and her parents had thrown her out. And they would have nothing to do with her. And people would, sort of snicker and say, yeah, it was his child, but it wasn't. And he adopted this child from this girl. And that was his oldest son, and the little girl is his actual child. And then you see John Edwards with his family, and he essentially had not only two Americas, but almost two families, because he had the tragedy of the teenage son being killed in the car accident, and then the two younger children being born after that. And then you see Elliot with his daughter. These men are consummate fathers. These pictures are not pictures just for show. They tell their children to stay on the straight and narrow. They lay down a moral code for their children that is conservative and traditional and religiously bound, and yet they're living these other double lives. And the interesting thing is, they have good children. It's almost as if the sort of whatever this curse is from their own fathers, they're able to correct it, and they raise good children. The Icarus complex, biology is destiny. This may be a biologically based complex, and it may be rooted in genetic risk, because we do find these bipolar disorders, we find addictions, we find major depressions, we find OCD, and we now know that psychiatrically those disorders have been reclassified as biologically based disorders.